This edition of the Bio Report is brought to you by the California Technology Council, providing discounts on products and services essential to every startup. For more information, visit californiatechnology.org/member benefits. I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. It can take up to 6 years to accumulate enough evidence to support advancing an experimental drug into clinical development. TwoXAR is working to rapidly accelerate that process through the use of big data and its proprietary algorithms to find and screen large public and proprietary data sets to identify new drug candidates and determine their efficacy. We spoke to Andrew Radin, co-founder and CEO of TwoXAR, about the company's technology, how it's being applied today, and the evolution of the company's strategy. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's great to be here.
We're going to talk about the drug discovery process, how the era of big data is changing that, and the approach your company is taking. You're focused on shortening the discovery stage of drug development. Why don't we begin with that? What's wrong with the way drug development is done today? Why does it take so long?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I would start off by saying it's not necessarily wrong. I think the methods and the processes that people have used over the years has served us quite well. The industry has brought society a number of life-saving medications, and we should all be proud of that. But I also think there's ways we can make it better. I'm sure your audience knows that it can take 10 to 15 years and estimates as high as $2 billion or more to bring a drug from initial idea to FDA approval. And those costs are only going up over time, right? And kind of I think some of the genesis of the company was thinking about there's got to be a better way. And so, one of the challenges that goes into finding new drugs is it, traditionally it's been a bit of a game of chance, right? Like the way this is handled historically has been to generate lots and lots of molecules to test them out. And there's been advances in high throughput screening and that sort of thing. And look, we know of pharmas that have generated, millions of these molecules. But then to sort of take those massive catalogs and go through them, it's kind of a slow and expensive process. To run these wet lab assays and use that to kind of narrow down the choices to find the most promising candidates. And our thought is, there's got to be a way to speed that up, right? There's got to be some ways that, we can use computers and computation to bring a lot of value into that entire cycle and help shrink those timelines and reduce those costs.
Well, let's talk about your platform for discovery. How does it work, and what is the payoff in terms of accelerating the process?
Yeah, so the technology itself is about using data science in kind of some very clever ways. And let me start by saying, look, we are not the first computer scientists to take a stab at the drug discovery problem. There's been lots of pretty cool stuff that's been developed over the years to help. Whether that's molecular modeling for modeling, protein interaction networks, things of this nature. Great stuff, of course, happening on the genetic side and finding, differences in people's DNAs that can help illuminate, what disease mechanisms are happening. But one of the issues with all those computational methods is that they're all very different, right? Someone will go after a particular method. And they all tend to have this same characteristic of producing lots of false positives, right? So one of my favorite examples is, believe it or not, you can actually use the clinical record, right? When you go in and you see your physician, that information about that interaction is recorded, and there's people that can take this data. Of course, it's anonymized, and your personal information is included, but you can use that data to make predictions on which drugs might treat a disease, right? And so the way that would work is you would look at what's called a surveillance window, say over 10 years, a group of people on that medication. And then you would look, further in the record and say, okay, what's the odds ratio? What's the likelihood that they would get any number of diseases? And you can use that to determine, geez, if people are on this medication and they have a lower odds ratio of getting a disease, maybe that drug is protective, right? This has nothing to do with biology or, all the protein docking and all the stuff that we're traditionally thinking about from a computational perspective. But just like molecular modeling and other methods, it also suffers from this. Predictions can have lots of false positives, right? Great example, multiple sclerosis, right? So if you looked at that surveillance window, and you did it without some intelligence behind it, you might conclude that that birth control causes multiple sclerosis, which of course it doesn't. But it would look that way from a data perspective because women get MS at approximately twice the rate of men. And of course, last time I checked, most men aren't taking birth control. So it's things like that where you get these false positives. And our idea from the data science perspective is, why not take all these very different data sets and these very different approaches and build a meta-analysis on top of all of it and use that to sort of weed out what's real from what's fake. And so if we see information in very different data sources that's congruent, that seems to be leaning in the same direction, that gives us some confidence that we might have something that's interesting from a prediction perspective.
There have been a couple of developments that have enabled you to do what you do. I thought we could walk through those and have you explain how they have reshaped the landscape to make this approach possible. The first is the emergence of cloud computing. Can you start there?
Yeah, look, I would start by saying all the things that we do from a methods perspective wouldn't have been possible even just a few years ago. And there's a number of things that have made this all possible, and certainly cloud computing is one of them. And so, just to kind of maybe familiarize folks with the idea of cloud computing, one of my favorite analogies is sort of comparing it to electricity, to the power that we use. And by and large, people don't go out and build their own power plants to power the electricity their businesses need. They just buy it from the utility company, right? Way cheaper than building your own power plant. It's a lot of sunk cost to be able to do that. You use electricity when you need it, and you just simply turn it off when you don't. And cloud computing is kind of the same idea, right? For us to do what we've done today, if we had to go out and purchase that physical equipment to do our computational work, that would have cost tens of millions of dollars. It was more spend than we've ever come close to date. But instead, cloud computing allows us to get computing resources on demand, and we can, in just a few minutes, with tens of millions of dollars of infrastructure, right? We end up paying a few $100 to actually run that within a few minutes. We can get these results computationally, and so that's just huge, right? To have access to just these massive computing infrastructures that you can literally purchase on a per minute basis. That just makes the economics of the whole thing possible.
The second advance has been machine learning. What's the impact there?
Yeah, look, so yeah, for me, it's the infrastructure, it's the algorithms and the data. From the algorithms perspective, it's kind of interesting. I think people have sort of got a sense of some of the things that are happening algorithmically. Certainly, now we're more talking to our phones and have them converting that into text, and that is dramatically better than it's been in years past. Some exciting things happening in the image search space, contextually describing what you want to see in an image and having the computer be able to identify that. Obviously, people have noticed, right? There's cars, self-driving cars, at least here in Silicon Valley, roaming the streets. All of that has come out of a bunch of things just from the algorithmic perspective, and of course, certainly one of them is machine learning. And what that technology allows us to do is to examine massive sets of data and sort of come through that data and find associations that we might have otherwise missed. And so that's one of the tools in our toolbox. I would also go so far as to say that machine learning is a very exciting technology, but the tools that we use are more than just the machine learning. And I think one of the Often the misconceptions is, oh, I just have a bunch of data, I'll get a machine learning algorithm, and lo and behold, scientific discovery will be made. The reality is there's a lot of other infrastructure that goes into this. Nothing is sexy and exciting about data warehousing and statistics. New, modern, high-end development languages. But all of these things are part of what's in our toolbox, and sort of this steady progression in algorithms and data science tools and all the things that go into software engineering as well as into computer science, kind of makes this all possible, right? It's a very large and complex system where the tool sets and the capabilities and the algorithms are all coming together to make this type of analysis and the type of things that we do, way more tractable today than they were in years past.
There's also a diversity of publicly available structured data from NIH and other research institutes. How has this been used, and are you only able to take structured data, or is there an opportunity to really go beyond that?
Oh, yeah. So, obviously data science, requires the data to do some useful analysis. And this might even sound counterintuitive, but, the more data you have, the more likely you are to find some meaningful associations in it. And things like, noisy data, which in the past, we often talk to folks and they say, well, there's this big effort to sort of clean up data and normalize data. Modern data science techniques are completely fine with that. We are able to take extremely noisy data. In fact, we assume from the very beginning that the data is riddled with errors. And using these data science techniques, and especially this is a great place where machine learning comes in, we can actually extract some of that signal from that noise. But your question about just like, where does the data come from? There's both public and private sources. On the public side, the NIH, the FDA, European Union through places like Array Express, there is just a deluge of freely available data that's out there that you can use to do these sorts of things. In fact, when before our company was a company, when we were just doing some experiments in a shed in my backyard, we made some very early predictions and some very interesting work, all from public data. We hadn't yet gotten into some of the private data sources we have today. And so there's just plenty of stuff out there that, really any researcher, with a laptop can go and download these things and start experimenting.
Can you screen custom libraries for clients? Do they ever bring those to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, find that kind of the marriage between the public and the private data sets, make for much better predictions. Our typical mode of a project is that we will get associated with a disease expert. And what we do is we can bring them, some new ideas and some new insights to the computation. And more often than not, those disease experts, either themselves have done, a bunch of assays. Maybe they've got some RNA-seq or some other gene expression. Maybe they've got some clinical information. With some of the pharmas we've been discussing, of course, they have large catalogs of molecules and data on that. So, everyone based on their expertise and kind of the where they, play in terms of their relationship to us, almost always has some data set, and we're able to import those into our system. And then, like I say, the more diversity of the data we have, the more quantity of the data, the better the predictions are. And so we love to supplement, what we get from the public sources with what we get, directly from these collaborations, integrate that all into our platform, and then use that to make better predictions.
You said your approach is not intended to replace, but instead to speed up the way drug discovery is done today. What can this technology do and do well, and what can't it do?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So, it's funny. I often get questions about, and it's, the questions are sort of staged, like machine learning and AI. It's like the Terminator scenario, right? These computers are now sentient and they're going to kill us all. And I'm here to tell you that's not the case, right? We are unable to ask our platform how it's feeling today and get any response. And so there is, I think, and it is maybe confusing at times because, you can, talk to the computer and you can have it translate into different languages and these images, it sort of seems like there's maybe some beginnings of intelligence, but it's I'm here to tell you, it is not the same as human creativity, right? And so what our technology is about is looking at billions of points of information and really help teasing out what are some trends or what are some things that the computer can sort of indicate in the data that the human can't. And that's kind of where the technology ends. And so as I was saying earlier, all of our projects, we are working with a collaborator in that space who has deep disease expertise and knowledge. And so when the computer is ultimately sort of pointing out things from maybe a recommendation standpoint is the way to think about it, it's more of an assistant for the researcher rather than leading the research itself. And so, it provides a lot of insights, a lot of maybe new ideas, if you will, but ultimately it's the human creativity component that comes in that kind of, draws the conclusions about how we can actually affect disease ultimately and produce drug candidates that has some meaning to them.
At what point in the drug discovery process then would you see this best applied?
Yeah, so for us, we're in the early stages of drug discovery, and so this is sort of after you've generated maybe a large catalog of molecules that you're considering. This is where our technology comes into play. We can help quickly go through that catalog and figure out what's most efficacious and most likely to be efficacious for a disease. And then we typically take those predictions and run preclinical studies to help further validate whether those predictions are producing something meaningful. And that point is when we're typically working with a collaborator. And then post preclinical, all the things that you need to do to bring a drug to market, going through the phase clinical trials, et cetera. That's not the space we work in, right? We're really more focused in that early stage drug discovery, where we can help focus efforts on prospective drugs that you want to ultimately run a preclinical study against.
If one of the powers of this technology is to find those sorts of unexpected connections, it would seem one of the great uses for this would be repurposing of drugs. Is it being applied in that way in any sense?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and people often ask us, isn't this drug repurposing? And I think drug repurposing has different meaning to different folks. I mean, it typically means it's an asset that was developed for a different disease, was brought to some point, and maybe it was found not to be efficacious in a phase 2, but safe in humans. So maybe there's an opportunity to try it in another disease. In other cases, it might be that drug is an FDA-approved molecule, and it turns out it could possibly be used in other diseases. And so our technology certainly doesn't discriminate from the perspective of making a prediction on whether or not a drug can be efficacious in a disease, whether that's a new chemical entity that has never been brought to the world, or whether that's something that has already gone through FDA approval. The computer is happy to process either. I think, really the repurposing stuff is more about kind of the pros and cons from the business opportunity perspective. Certainly some of the pros are a lot of that drug might have been de-risked. Certainly if it's already being manufactured, there's a lot of cost and risk that has been sort of previously handled. But on the flip side of that, if you're looking at an indication where, clinical studies can cost 30, 50, maybe $100 million, to verify that efficacy. And, your drug that you're trying to repurpose is maybe something that's come off patent and now it's a generic. Like those economics really don't, fit together. And for us, it's quite a challenge to figure out how to make those things work. And actually we're always on the hunt for a solution to that problem. Because we do see sometimes in our predictions, we'll see these repurposed candidates that come up. We realize that from a business perspective, there's no way for us to go, raise the money to go and put that through a clinical trial. And so if we could find ways from the economic standpoint, to bring some of those opportunities to the world, we'd love to do it. But that's really where the challenges come in is there a good licensing pathway, for that repurposed drug to come on market for a new indication?
What's been done to validate the platform at this point?
Yeah, so I kind of hinted about this earlier. in the early days, we would run the computation. We would sit down with disease experts. We would show them some of the predictions, and we'd go, "Hey, this is pretty awesome, right?" And we universally got feedback that was like, "Well, maybe this will work. I'd love to see it, run a preclinical study on this and see what happens." So our sense of validation and what I think the community around us sees as validation is running through those clinical studies. We have about 7 or 8 projects underway. We have talked about or released some of the work that we have done, in particular in rheumatoid arthritis. We found some new and interesting drugs. And what's most, I think, appealing about these, especially one of them, is that they're using mechanisms that are not traditionally associated with rheumatoid arthritis. And so there's some interesting science maybe to be uncovered about why those drugs are working. And to be clear, by working, these are preclinical studies, these are early results, this is not tested in humans, but there's some early indications, based on a collagen-induced arthritis model where we're looking at, ankle size, swelling, and doing histology, afterwards, that, these drugs are doing some very interesting things. And we have some other preclinical studies in different disease areas where we have some early and very promising results. So that's kind of where we, look to evaluate the quality of these predictions is, what's actually happening in that wet lab experiment.
And when the data in your platform, is this looking at actual clinical data? Is it looking at chemical structural data and how a target might have a receptor that fits? What is the world of data that you're examining?
It's all of that, right? So again, kind of going back to this idea that any one of those data sets, you can apply a method to it. You might find some interesting opportunities, but kind of just littered with false positives. We look at all that stuff. So we look at the physical structure of molecules. We look at their protein binding profiles. We model protein interaction networks and how they relate to disease. We look at gene expression assays and look at the differentiation between disease and control, as well as look at gene expression differences between drugs applied to a biological system versus its normal state. We look at the clinical record, as I was mentioning earlier in my example. And so all these very different data sets are combined together to ultimately make that prediction. And again, we're not only looking at just a single method or a single data set.
And what's the business model here? How do you work with your customers, and has this been evolving?
Yeah, so in the early days of the company, we were more focused on collaborations with industry, using this technology to help promote or help move forward disease programs. And certainly a lot of our the things that we've talked about from a public perspective have been the academic collaboration with Stanford and with Mount Sinai, University of Chicago, and places like that. We are starting to shift our focus a little bit and more looking to get catalogs of molecules that we have some licensing relationship with. And the reason is, historically what we've been focused on is just showing the technology works. And so we would choose compounds that have already been synthesized, that we could go out to Sigma and buy at low cost and show that they do something interesting in a preclinical setting. And now we're focusing on things that can bring market opportunity as well. And so that's proprietary compounds that are owned or generated by folks who do that work. As I say, there's many pharmas who've generated millions of these compounds. And so we are starting to now examine those large compound libraries, look for things that could be potentially efficacious in disease, showing that those predictions are meaningful in preclinical studies, and then working with that partner where we're licensing those compounds to create either joint ventures or collaborations to help progress those molecules into clinical studies and ultimately to FDA approval.
Andrew Radin, co-founder and CEO of TwoXAR. Andrew, thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, it was great to spend time with you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send an email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.